All right, so we are live on YouTube. So I want to thank everybody who came in virtual attendance today for this interview with Grant Toch, who is running for a trustee seat on the Great Neck Public School District's Board of Education. Grant is running unopposed, and Grant, I know I've said it a few times before, but thank you for taking the time out of your hectic schedule to be here today or tonight. So let's just start off. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run for the trustee seat on the Board of Education?
Sure. Well, first, thank you very much for hosting tonight's event. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and the larger community about myself and my candidacy and my vision for the Great Neck School District in the years to come. As I said, my name is Grant Toch. I live in Great Neck Great Neck Estates. I've lived here since 2006 with my wife, and I have 3 daughters. One is 10 years old, 10 Saddle Rock. One of them is 13 years old in 7th grade in North Middle School. And my oldest daughter is 17. She's in 11th grade in North High School. I've been here, as I said, since 2006. A staple of my household and for myself specifically has been just involvement in our community. I think I've been involved with the school district since 2008, first starting with the UPTC. And since 2008, I have been on the budget committee, both as a member and as a chairperson of the committee. In addition, I've been on the legislative committee, and I've served a couple of terms on the executive board of the UPTC. In addition to that, I've been a volunteer in the youth sports leagues. I just came from a youth sports practice. My daughter plays on a soccer team. I co-manage a soccer team, U14 girls soccer team. My wife coaches 2 CYO girls teams, and I've been I carry the bags and the books for her to those games. So frequently you can find me or my wife on the basketball court or the soccer field at various times during the week. In addition, I've been a member of the Temple Bethel Board of Directors. And I am also on the finance committee there. And lastly, I live in Great Neck Estates. I'm a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals. And I would say even my wife, she's run the Great Neck Estates Day Camp in the Park for almost 10 years at this point, although she's now aged out. Professionally, I'm a financial analyst. I've been so since 2002. Prior to that, I was a practicing tax attorney. I practiced law for 3 or 4 years. In the capacity as a financial analyst, invest in financial service companies, and I've spent time investing in governments as well. Really, during that time, my real expertise is in community banks. What community banks and governments have in common is just organizations that are committed to growth in local communities, whether by lending directly to local businesses or supporting various services through government, through taxation. So that's been a hallmark of my professional career. As from an educational perspective, I went to college at the University of Michigan. I have a law degree from the George Washington University, and I have an MBA from Columbia University. I'm running for the Board of Education really quite simply because unfortunately Don Ashkenaz passed away. Don was a long-standing member of the Board of Education. I had the privilege to work with him throughout my 13 years on the UPTC, specifically the Budget Committee. And unfortunately, he passed away. And when he passed away, when you couple that with the fact that Larry Gross had retired about 4 or 5 years ago, with the two of them, 60 to 70 years worth of budgeting experience left the district. And I think I'm uniquely qualified to fill that void left by both of them effectively. Without either of them on the board, there's really no one left who has any finance experience. And this is a $250 million business effectively. There should be someone on the board who has experience generally with finance. And in addition, I just don't have general finance experience. I've been, as I said, working for 13 years on a volunteer basis with the UPTC, with the school district, where I've worked almost exclusively with the budget. As I mentioned, I was on the budget committee, both as a member and the head of the committee. And as in that capacity, I not only have I become intimately familiar with the budget, all the details and the issues, but I also have a working relationships with the administrators and board members that are involved in this process. I think, on day one, at least in that respect, I would walk in quite smoothly. I'm not sure there'd be much change. So I think when you couple my experience and my expertise with the opportunity that really presented itself once Don unfortunately passed away, I think it's a unique meeting of expertise and opportunity. And when you couple that with the fact that I have 3 children in the school district, I think it's safe to say I have a vested interest in making sure that the school district is able to provide the maximum resources for students and teachers to make sure we get the best outcomes for our children, all while making sure we do it in a fiscally responsible manner so that we minimize the tax burden brought upon the residents of our town.
Terrific. And I think you mentioned one of the perfect starting, jumping off points here for this specific interview is that looming $252 million budget, which has only increased over the past few years. Coming from your expertise, how have you felt about this year's budget? Budgets that have been approved in the years past, do you believe the board was fiscally responsible there? And if not, or even so, what would you do to when you were to come in and kind of analyze that from a solely fiscal responsibility? Maybe break it down for everybody.
Sure. So, I'd say that the budget this year is very similar to the budgets we've had in years past. I think anyone who's attended any of the budget meetings that have gone on in the last few weeks or months can see really, there's one looming issue for the budget, and it's not unique to Great Neck, I should say. It's really, I've taken the time across many years looking at our peer school districts on Long Island and Westchester, looking out even more broadly across New York. Our problem, you can see very simply on the slide deck that they provide, which is the budget's going up about 4.5%, at least as proposed. The allowable tax levy would allow for a 2.8% increase, but the board's has decided to increase the levy by 2%. So with our operating budgets growing faster than our revenues effectively, we've had to fund that differential with fund balance or reserves. We're fortunate, I would say. I think the board, I think John Powell, I think the board has done a decent job actually of balancing the growth in costs with the fund balances that we have and the need to provide the maximum resources we can to get the outcomes we desire. I think but that's going to be the immediate issue, or at least the issue over time that we need to think about. Eventually, revenues and expenditures are going to need to come into line somehow, some way. We are fortunate, though, I should say, that we do have a large fund balance. It's about $65 million. And we do have a diminished but still very meaningful cushion that exists in any given school year. So that we've been fortunate enough to be able to add to reserves at the end of the year on a net basis, despite funding the operating budget from those reserves during the school year. So again, I would say, this trend has been longstanding. It's not unique to Great Neck. And I think, from the way I see it, the board has done at least a decent job of trying to manage all this. The best evidence of this is we've had no program cuts. And I would say, this is not and they've balanced that, I think, at least moderately well against the burden that taxes do present for many, if not all, families across this peninsula. And the simple way to see that would be if we include the proposed budget for the upcoming school year, in the last 4 years, including the one that's to come, the board basically left about $10 million on the table that they could have taxed, but chose not to. For example, again, just relevant to this year, the tax levy could go up 2.8%, but instead they've decided to increase the levy only by 2%. And again, that's been about $10 million. So they're not, they're certainly sensitive to it. And I think if I'm on the Board of Education, my goal will be to continue on this careful balance with a long-standing view towards trying to ultimately bring revenues and expenditures into balance. As far as what I would maybe some of the things I'd like to change about the budgeting process or bring to the budgeting process. I know transparency is a word that a lot of people throw around, but I do think there are some things we can actually do to make it more transparent. One of my lessons from the 2016 experience was that many people didn't know about the budget, or even if some materials were available, they weren't really available in a way that was easily graspable by people. You had to go and get various documents and put it into a spreadsheet. So I think one of the things I'd like to do is help alleviate that by not only making all the budget documents available in a readily accessible format, but I think in a presentation format that I think will be easy to see. For example, one of the things, if any people out there have attended my UPTC budget committee meetings, one of the things I like the school district to provide is not just the current snapshot of the current school year, but a 5-year trailing and ideally a 5-year forward forecast. We don't get those 5-year forecasts, but that's one of the things I'd like to provide to the school district, in addition to just that format where you can see it all on one page, the trailing 5 years, the current year, but also provide people at least with a forecast of where we're going, not because it's going to be exactly correct, but because it can give people a sense of where we're going, and a way, at least if they want to approach the budget, a way that they can approach it and start to ask questions that are at least relevant to the context that the overall budget sits within. And then I'd like to also bring an element of a public sort of a public viewing to like a financial plan, a long-term plan for the budget. I think back to 2016, I think maybe some people in the community were surprised that we had to do that sort of bond offering, for example, because there was really nothing that you could have looked at over the previous 5 or 10 years and known that that was coming. And perhaps it wasn't entirely foreseeable over the 5 or 10-year period, but if you have a transparent planning process, at least you can provide to the parents of this district an idea of where we're going, so that when things do arise, short of there being some kind of event that catalyzes a specific expenditure, they can at least see where we're going and that we actually have our hands around what's going on. I think it adds a measure of credibility to the board overall, to the school district, and I think it would help, at least looking back, it would have helped eliminate maybe some of the issues that arose back then. Hopefully I hit enough of your questions, but if I didn't answer all of them, just please follow up.
Absolutely, and I've seen a few questions pop up, so anyone anyone who's watching, feel free to submit a question via the Q&A section in the Zoom bar. We will get to those, of course, but right now I wanted to go into the question that, of course, has been on everybody's mind with the coronavirus pandemic. So first part of the question, how do you feel the board did in allocating money, especially the past year for the 2021 budget and this year for the 2022 budget, in terms of handling with the coronavirus pandemic, mixed with some state aid that the school district is receiving? And also a little second part to that, if a second wave were to occur, or any other setbacks were to occur, what would you potentially advise the board, or the district, I should say, in drafting the next year's budget with that?
So I guess it might be your question, I think, addresses the substantive aspect of this, plus the financial aspect. So I'll handle one at a time. I think substantively, I think the spring of last year was, I mean, no one could expect anything great reasonably. This was nothing that had happened before, and no one could reasonably have foreseen such an occurrence. And I would say, just having 3 kids in the district, seeing what they had, was not. I would say it was at least unsatisfactory, perhaps maybe a word to use for those 3 or 4 months. But I think for the 2020-21 school year, the current school year, my daughters we had our daughters going into school, and it was a hybrid method. I think the school district did a great job. It was a tremendous improvement substantively from what had been offered in the initial weeks and months after when the pandemic hit. And I feel very very thankful that they did this. As part of my job, I speak with people all over the country, various community banks or companies across the country, and I can only tell you the stories I've heard which were far worse than what we experienced, or at least what my family experienced. Obviously, it's not ideal to have had to go to school that way, but I think all things considered, they did a good job with that. Financially, I think that, I would say, in my opinion, John Powell has done a good job over time amassing the reserves that we have on our balance sheet. And I think, because of his good work, we had a pool of money that we were able to pull from, and really, and not miss a stride as a school district. And, I think we're very, from that perspective, I'm always appreciative of the work that John does. And, we're beneficiaries of it, even if most people don't even know that it goes on behind the scenes. So I think from a financial perspective, I think funding that through fund balance is a perfectly legitimate way to fund it. It was completely unforeseen. That's what fund balance is there for. It's sort of like a family, right? That's why you have your rainy day savings. That makes sense to me. And then I think lastly, you asked me just if this were to occur again, what would I say? My sense would be that if we had a full lockdown again, thankfully we have now a distance learning platform that we can now slip in and use fully. We won't have the March, April, May, June experience that we had from the previous school year. And so I would, and I think if something came from some kind of pandemic where it was not as bad as that, but required us to go back to the current environment, then we would probably just go back into what we had. I would say as an addendum to that, I would say I think one of the advantages that we're going to have coming out of this pandemic is that we did create this asset, this digital learning platform, and I think it provides us an opportunity to go back and look at what we did well, what we didn't do well, what other school districts around the country did well using these or not as well using these platforms. And I would say, we probably should look to improve that, not just because the situation could hypothetically arise or we need to go back into some form of lockdown, but also because this could be used in a way to augment our current in-school learning. I can think of two examples, at least off the top of my head, where that could be the case. Sometimes there are classes that are maybe offered in the north side that are not on the south side. In that case, it might be that the distance learning platform is an excellent, cost-efficient way for one side of our district to use the resources of the other. So I think that something like that could work. Another example would be, say a student, South High School is interested in oceanography. Maybe there's a school, a community college, or a high school for that matter, in Florida, that has a good oceanography class or a series of classes. We might be able to provide access to that substantive education without having the student suffering, right? That student will be able to see whether or not oceanography is something they want or not, something that we couldn't offer them here in our own schools. So I think it offers us a way to enhance the offerings within our school district. And I think it offers us the opportunity to look outside of our school district for classes that we don't necessarily offer to our current students. So, and I think even if we offer, I would even say this, if we offer classes to those outside of our school district, maybe we offer something, that would be a way to raise some revenues for the school district as well, perhaps. So and I think there's a lot that we can learn from this as well that could be beneficial.
So as far as changes go to the board, is there anything that you feel that needs revamping either within the board or within the district, something that you would want to implement when you're elected as well, or if you're elected as well?
So as far as changes to the board, I have to say, generally speaking, the way things look from the outside looking in aren't necessarily how they look when you're on the inside looking out. So I think without having ever been part of the board, I think it'd be hard for me to actually say what exactly I would change about the Board of Education. There's certainly different things that have been tossed around, maybe adding more board members or term limits or things of that nature. And that's certainly some things I'm willing to consider for sure. I think I just need to actually I win, I just happen to get there and take a look around and see what's going on. And I think along those lines, you're asking me, more broadly, are there things I would change about the school district? And again, I would say not only being a parent and not being on the board, looking from the inside out. It's not necessarily all that apparent. I think one of the things I hope to do, should I win, is to actually go and speak to the principals, the assistant principals, students at the various schools, janitorial staff, et cetera, just because really those are going to be the people who can provide just the non-quantitative anecdotes about what can be done better. I think that would be very helpful, and I'm committed to doing that. Should I win? That having been said, are there things that I at least I think I'd be interested in exploring for change? Absolutely. One of which was, just as we talked about, the distance learning platform. Trying to figure out how we can use that to augment what we offer in in our current in classroom format. The second thing I would say is, as I mentioned earlier, providing the budget materials in a more concise format, a more contextualized format, a more readily accessible format, so that the budget conversations, so that the budget is more easily understandable by those who want to understand it, and so that our conversations can be more informed when those discussions actually actually happen. I'd also say, it seems to me from talking to parents around the district across time, very often you'll hear comments about what other schools are offering, our peer school districts are offering across Long Island. It might be helpful for the parents across this district, for the Board of Ed to actually have some kind of public review, not just of our curriculum, but of the curriculum that is given by our peer school districts, just so that we can actually, as a community, understand what it is we're offering, what it is we're not offering, what it is we should be offering. I think that would at least, again, provide more transparency, give the parents of the district an understanding of the work that's being done on the Board of Education to make sure that the students and teachers are given access to the resources that they absolutely need to succeed as the world is evolving and changing. And then, I think lastly is that, just from my experience working with some teachers, one of the things that I heard frequently from the teachers with whom I worked was that we have increasingly been losing the talent war to other school districts, for whatever the reasons are. So I'm genuinely interested to learn if that is in fact the case, if so, why that is, and what it is we can do, if anything, to prevent that from happening. So again, I think it's all subject to change once I get on the inside and look out. But these are at least the things that I'm interested in at least pursuing, at this point in time.
Terrific. And I will go to the question and answers that were posted by looks like one person. First one, can you speak about unfunded mandates and their effect on the budget?
Sure. Unfunded mandates are just mandates that come from the state level, effectively, or from the state government rather, where the localities, the local school districts are supposed to comply, but they don't necessarily come with any funding. And so a problem for a school district is that it is required to do X, Y, and Z. Let's say in the case of COVID, right? The state handed out all these mandates, but they didn't actually provide the checks to hire more teachers, buy more desks, make whatever the changes are that we're required to do that. As I said before, we're fortunate that we have a large fund balance and a very meaningful cushion in any annual year budget. So while those things are problematic, no doubt, and maybe, I don't know, some kids might say unfair or what have you, we're pretty fortunate to at least have those rainy day savings that we can pull from, so that if things like that happen, we're able to take care of them as best as we can. And ideally, it looks like the federal government is now going to actually be not directly reimbursing, but providing monies to the states to pass through to the schools, and we'll get some of that funding back. So at least, again, it's at least we've budgeted it in a way that we're able to deal with them as they come down the pike.
And this last question actually kind of tailors into something I was going to ask as well. You have many years of involvement in various committees. If Mr. Glickman won against Mrs. Berkowitz, and I'll even include or vice versa, how would you feel about working someone with far less experience in running in the running and history of the Great Neck Public Schools? And again, on the flip, how would you feel about working with someone with far greater experience in running and the history of the Great Neck Public Schools?
That's a good question. To be honest with you, I don't think it. I've worked in my career professionally with people more experienced and less experienced than I. By virtue of someone being more experienced or less experienced, it doesn't mean I'm not going to learn something from them either way. Everyone's going to bring their own experiences to the board. I think board members have to be willing to collaborate. It's a requirement, I think, and be open to everybody's life experiences and opinions, regardless of their level of experience. I think if someone were to come on with that has less experience, that doesn't mean they're not going to have any less valid opinions or have their own expertise in the real life that was not necessarily gathered out in the school district that won't be useful. So I don't think I would look down upon anything like, in terms of that. And as far as working with someone with more experience, I think it's great. I think it only helps to have that. You go through certain cycles, right? And it helps to have people there who've been through them so that you can learn from them. And ideally, ultimately one day become that wise old sage yourself and be able to pass that along to others. So I think regardless of whether or not that person is more experienced or less experienced, I don't think it's really going to matter to me one bit. I'm just going to keep my eyes open, my ears open, and try to help out as best I can and learn as much from the others as best I can.
And we actually have one other come in here. What do you think will be the biggest challenge for you in joining the board?
Well, it's a $250 million business, and it's a large business in effect, and and there are very many different players in that school district. You have the administrators, the teachers, the students. And as I said, it is a big task to learn that business. I do it professionally all the time. I'm asked to learn businesses very quickly. So there's no doubt to my mind that I have that ability. And I think, as I said to you, what I hope to do, should I win, is to go out and engage the head of the teachers union, right? The principals, the assistant principals, the students, staff, so that I can, as quickly as possible, come up to speed. I'm just going to try to be as eager as I can. I think one of the things I bring, I think anyone who's worked with me knows I'm a voracious reader and I have pretty large intellectual curiosity. So I think that those attributes will help me come in handy as I make that journey. So it's a big task. It's a very meaningful task. It's a very impactful. It's a very serious responsibility that's given to the trustees, and I will take it that way, and hope to pass along the school district to the next set of trustees in at least in better shape than I received it.
Terrific. Well, I would like to thank yourself, Grant, for taking the time out of your hectic schedule and I'm sure busy evening for speaking with everyone here. I'd like to thank everyone who virtually attended as well. There was a live stream of this event that will be archived on our The Island Now YouTube channel. It's also posted on our Facebook, and I will also be writing a story of this for this upcoming week's edition of the Great Neck News, the last issue ahead of the election. So Grant, thank you again for taking the time to speak, and I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you very much for hosting, and thank everyone for attending as well.
Good night.